Welcome, everyone, to It's Our City. I'm Yasmin Stainer, the Executive Director of Hartford NEXT. Hartford NEXT is the coalition of the Neighborhood Revitalization Zones, or NRZs. Hartford NEXT is a citywide organization to strengthening Hartford's neighborhood through civic engagement and community collaboration. We're thrilled to have you here today for the second to last episode of the Hartford NEXT It's Our City series, Teaching the Children. Couple of house rules real quick before we kick things off. A quick reminder to please take the moment to silence your phones, your pagers, or your carrier pigeons. Also, this event is being live streamed, so we encourage you to share your questions in the chat. We'll be collecting them throughout for the Q&A portion later on. And before I hand it off to our host, mark your calendars for our final episode of It's Our Cities on May 3rd at the Downtown Library in Hartford, where we'll be talking about boards and commissions. It's a great way to get involved and make a real difference in your community, so come out, learn, and take the next steps in civic leadership. With that, I'll hand it off to our host, Matt Larson from WICA, who will introduce our special guest today, Superintendent Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Yasna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Larson, and I am a Vice President of the West End Civic Association, WICA NRZ, and as such, I'm also a representative of the West End on the board of Hartford NEXT. So thank you for tuning in today on this cold, snowy, dreary, wet day. So I will be hosting today's episode of our Hartford NEXT It's Our City series. I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing Hartford Public Schools Superintendent and CEO, Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Before we begin, I just want to thank the Noah Webster Microsociety Magnet School and Principal Gus Jacobson for having us here live in the school's library. Noah Webster Micro-Magnet Society School, as you can imagine, has been named after the famous 18th and 19th century lexicographer Noah Webster, who was born in what is now West Hartford, but at the time was still part of Hartford. And the school here originally opened in 1901 as a neighborhood school, and as Principal Jacobson has pointed out, there are current students whose parents and grandparents even attended here. This is kind of an institution in the neighborhood. And so the school includes pre-kindergarten 3 through 8th grade. Like I said, it's a beloved institution, and also just wanted to quickly thank, again, Principal Jacobson and the staff here at Noah Webster Microsociety Magnet School. Also from WICA last summer, I also serve on WICA's Architectural History and Resources Committee, and so the staff here opened up the school for one of our tours last summer, so again, really appreciate that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our special guest, Dr. Torres-Rodriguez.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure. And as I was hearing you speak about Noah Webster, I do want to echo your words of gratitude towards, of course, Principal Jacobson and then the entire staff and our families and our students, right? They also
Absolutely.
are part of the magic that I know happens here all the time. So kudos to all of them. And I'm glad to be here.
Great, great. Well, to start off, just can you give us a little bit of your background about your tenure in Hartford, your path coming up through educational leadership, and then also for our audience at home, the role the superintendent of schools plays in the education of our children here in Hartford?
Yes, so I am originally from Puerto Rico. I grew up in Puerto Rico until the age of 9 and then came with my mother, my brother. Very, very humble beginnings. We lived on Park Street in a very tight one-bedroom apartment. There were 8 of us in that space, and I was mentioning earlier that I was just admiring the books all around us, and I said I love libraries. Right? I don't know if you heard me say that, softly to myself, and I lived next door to the Park Street Library branch.
Wow.
And it was such a safe space for me in so many different ways. There was a lot happening in the city in the late 80s, early 90s, especially in that neighborhood. And the library, a community-based resource, was so meaningful. Not only did I fall in love with reading, I felt like I almost had the space to myself. And I think that, truly did inform my passion for learning and inquiry and curiosity And it also was then when I began to see that while my mother, worked 2 jobs many a times, that the community was there, and there were resources in the communities for my brother and myself to lean into, and that actually has informed how I lead. To your question about education and how I came into education. My first teacher in the fifth grade just happened to be a Latina teacher. I think I was lucky. It wasn't my, the experience that my brother had. But in that moment, Matt, I saw her. I felt a connection. I felt, wow, she happens to understand my language. She sees me in a different way, I think. And I said, I want to be an educator. That first day. Fast forward, I went wanting to become a teacher, and halfway through my college journey, my scholarship funds ran out, and I didn't have additional funding. And I always worked. I started working at the age of 14 to help, family pay bills. And I ran out of money, and I thought, I'm gonna have to pause, go back to work, and then come back a year later. And it so happened that I met a professor from the UConn School of Social Work at a community organizing event in Hartford. I was always into community and advocacy and working with others. And that professor said to me, we always see you at these events. What are you aspiring to do? And I said, well, I do want to become an educator. It's on pause right now. He said to me, well, if you're ever interested in social work, the School of Social Work at UConn has scholarship for those that are interested in social work. That is all I needed to hear. I felt like that's my ticket. So I veered a little bit from education, but got my undergraduate in human development, family studies, went on to an MSW, Master's in Social Work, and started teaching at Capital Community College, spent 7 years at Capital Community College. And so I guess I was able to bridge both worlds.
Absolutely.
We talked about Manchester.
Right.
And so I was an assistant principal in Manchester in the freshman center. Always had a passion for high schoolers and making sure that we worked in service of them with our educators, our families, our community. And fast forward, I went into administration and school administration. Hartford actually tried several times to recruit me to come to Hartford, and I always knew I would be coming back home. I always knew that I would be serving part of my mission in Hartford Public Schools. And when the opportunity came for the superintendency, I was encouraged to apply. Here I am, 8 years later. Don't think back then, if you were to ask me, I don't think I would have said yes, and that I would be here for 8 years. 8 years is the amount of time I spent as a student in our classrooms in Hartford Public Schools. 8 years is what I will have served as superintendent, and couldn't have been a better time, I guess. Everyone says you're at the right place at the right time, and at that moment, we worked really hard to the role of the superintendent. A primary goal is to operationalize, make the policies of the Board of Education come to life, if you will.
Okay.
Making sure that that I create a vision in partnership with community, identify how we're going to get there, what our strategies are going to be, what our programs, how we're going to use the resources. And I think specifically for me and my leadership perspective is that none of the work can happen in isolation. Right? Oftentimes, people think the leader is the person that makes everything happen. That could not be farther one from the truth, nor that is very far from my philosophy in leadership.
Right.
Truly is working alongside and with and learning with others, but especially our community, including our families, but also our young people, our students.
I might maybe just ask you to elaborate on that a little bit. We might get into it later in the discussion, but do you have like a specific example of a specific decision where someone thinks that, it's you operating in a vacuum, but really you have a team behind you that makes something happen?
Oh yeah, so many examples. So I really do believe that is part of, at the core of how I try to show up as a leader. A big example is when we had to right-size our district early on in my tenure, which is why I didn't think I would be here 8 years after, because the research does not support, first of all, superintendent longevity to be 8 years. Certainly not for females. Certainly not for females of color. So I need to, emphasize that.
Absolutely.
But my charge coming in was to consolidate our school system, to right-size and to consolidate and close schools. And so I was not going to do that in isolation, because obviously it was going to impact our community. And so I thought, we have to do this in partnership and have our community inform the thinking, the decisions. But for a while, and still till today, people think, well, superintendent, you close schools. My job was to engage and truly, truly listen to what the community was saying. They had a vision for the school system, what their dreams and aspirations were for students, for our educators, for families, for industry. And my job was to go to the Board of Education and say, okay, here are all of the themes, the voices, and what they are saying they want to be the experience, so that we can deliver on our promise to do right by each and every one of our students. But it was up to the Board of Education to then make the decision. The policy rests with the board. So that's an example.
I see. And so I feel like what you're alluding to kind of then is a great segue into the next question. So you've recently announced that Hartford Public Schools will undergo a leadership transition with a new superintendent search ongoing for the next academic year. What are some additional accomplishments that you're most proud of during your time as superintendent?
I think, we as a community have accomplished so much. Someone asked me the other day about your legacy, and I have a very, I guess, perhaps it's a non-traditional definition of legacy. People think of legacy as fixed things, and that's fine. We will have, by the time I transition, there will be 8 new facilities or updated facilities. Yes, that is great, and those were, designed with our community. That's great. But truly is the way, the how. I think that's what I will anchor leadership in, how we approach the work that we have done, which has been informed by so many other voices. Example, we have our student success centers at our comprehensive high schools, which I heard across the city early on in my tenure when I engaged community. They said, our high schoolers need a lot of support. We need what is called wraparound support. So students that have supports before school, after school, during school, ways that they can connect their learning to industry. So those success centers have been in place. We started with 1, we now have 3 at our comprehensive high schools. That's great. Our students have been able to, some get back on track. And you see year after year, slowly but surely, our graduation rates increasing. But that is directly connected to the work that the centers have allowed our students in partnership with educators to do.
Great. So one thing that I think you hear a lot of as well is the achievement gap. So I'm wondering if you can, give us a bit more information. What is the achievement gap? How does it correlate to student preparedness for job career readiness? I think you're kind of going along that track with these student success centers. So I'm curious how those interconnect or work together.
Yes, and this is I love this question all the time, because it gives me an opportunity to expand when we talk about gaps in education. So achievement gaps refers to very specific measurable differences in academic performance. Usually they're measured by test scores, standardized test scores, the SATs, for example, at the secondary level. What graduation rates is another one. What I always like to balance the conversation with is opportunity gaps. Okay. So we have achievement gaps, right? They measure student outcomes. And oftentimes it's easy when we think about achievement gaps to focus the problem on the student, right? So that the responsibility is on the student. When I think about opportunity gap, we're talking about access. Whether or not all students have access to the resources and the learning conditions. Those are 2 very different things. Right. Both of those happen in the school environment. So the measurement then, or the blame, for lack of a better word, or the focus, is one on the student, whereas the opportunity says, wait a minute, what is happening in the system? What is happening in the environment so that the student can or not access the conditions that have to be true for students to achieve, right? Those measures.
Right.
For example, access to high quality teachers on a regular, every single day in every classroom, access to facilities, right, that are innovative, access to supports at all times.
Right.
That's the difference. And so I always encourage everyone, yes, we're going to look at those achievement gaps, but let's not forget the opportunity gap, because in communities like ours, we know that there are pockets of concentrated need, and so we cannot forget about the access or the lack thereof that students have. So we look at achievement gap and we look at, okay, learners, what's going on for the learner, what's going on for the family, okay, that's fair. But also in the opportunity gap, we think about, are there policies that we have to explore? Are there structures are there adult actions that we have to look at? So I always encourage us to look very holistically at what is happening in the ecosystem of the student's learning experience.
Wow. So then I guess to that point then, what are some of the biggest challenges when you're looking at the student experience holistically? What are the biggest challenges that Hartford students face in closing the achievement gap, or also, in terms of the school system closing the opportunity gap?
Yes, that is a wonderful question, because it allows us to think about context. And I always say context matters,
right?
Because when we, looking at achievement is everyone is looked with the same pair of glasses, right? You put the glasses on and you're not considering the students, the barriers, right? The barriers that students may face. So it's very limited in how we look at it. And so some of the barriers here include, right, we have some of our students that do not have access to stable housing. We know that some of our students and families do not have access to regular meals. We in Hartford Public Schools provide sometimes the 3 meals for students: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if they're accessing our after-school evening programming. And so we have to think about all of those. We think about the fact that there are resource barriers, resource inequities, right? We right now are grappling with a challenging budget, and we have done the hard work. I would say not only my team, but schools with their school governance councils, we have over the years, that's another conversation we can have around what has been the mitigation effort throughout my tenure. But we've done the hard work. We've had to consolidate schools so that we can use resources in the smartest way. I said it then, I still say it now. That did not solve the problem. Wow. Because the problems are sustainable, structural in nature, that don't allow for sustainability. They don't allow us to continue, right, to thrive with the limitations that we have in resources.
Right.
So resource allocation means if we don't have enough in our budget because of inflation, because of rising costs, because we have to do right by our staff and give them the wages that they deserve, so that, right, they can feel that that they're valued, that they're seen, and that they're coming in here to do the best by our students. All of those things translate into resources: people, time, and money. How we structure the school day. So sometimes those become barriers as well. I would love to have tutoring opportunities for all of our students, because the research says that if students have access to high quality tutorial, small group tutoring, we know they're gonna catch up. I don't have that. I wish I had that. Right. That's just an example, right, of some of the barriers. And so it translates into that opportunity gap that we see here in many of our communities.
Wow. So then I think, from my point of view, or from what I hear in general too, is that one thing that might also contribute to the achievement gap, another issue that you hear a lot, is chronic absenteeism. Are you seeing a lot of that? Are there specific strategies to address chronic absenteeism? How does that contribute to these gaps?
Totally, and I think that's a perfect example of the opportunity gap, because within that, well, let me first define chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is defined at the state and the federal level as a student missing 10% or more of the school year. We have 180 days. a minimum of 180 instructional days. And so you miss 18 days of the year, you're chronically absent. And we have students that have more than 18 days, that miss more than 18 days. I think for us, and by the way, I'm going to shout out Hartford Public Schools, because way back, before it was in style to talk about chronic absenteeism, Hartford Public Schools led the charge. I remember the day in December, I think it was 2017-18, where, I called back then the mayor and all of our partners, and I said, we have to inform our community of the crisis that we have around chronic absenteeism. Back then, we were at around 25% chronic absenteeism, and that was alarming. I remember some of my colleagues, superintendents, saying to me, why are you making this a big deal? I wouldn't say anything publicly if I were you. So I would say, it's not about what's happened. Kids are not coming to school for a variety of reasons. And we have to talk about it. We have to educate ourselves so that we can get to the root causes. That was back then. Good thing we did that before a pandemic, because we had already begun to have structures in place. To your question about how you address it,
right?
We have structures now. We started to look at, first of all, are we even taking attendance? Because back then, I will be very honest, there was a lot of variance across our schools, across the district. We have some schools that were taking attendance, others were not, for a variety of reasons. So we said, let's just get the data right. Let's make sure that we're supporting our educators in doing that. Then we had time for educators and school leaders to talk about the attendance. What are we seeing? What are the trends that are seeing? We saw, give you two examples. In first grade, kinder and first grade, back then, 25% of our 5-year-olds, kindergartners, were chronically absent. And then it leveled down, meaning it improved. And then as the grades were going up, 9th grade was the highest. So we had 5-year-olds and then 14, 15-year-olds. Two key transition points. Those are glaring gaps for us. And so that meant that we had to approach it from very different ways. Right? 5-year-old does not get to school on their own, so that meant we had to wrap around the families. What supports did they needed? Transportation. Unemployment was another one. The fact that the little ones had to go to school and they had to be walked to the bus stop or to school by their older sibling, which was in high school. So that contributed to their, chronic absenteeism. So these are all very complex. So not only do we need the structures, but we need the supports. That is where our partners, our community-based resources and supports come in. We can't do this work alone, and sometimes we can make a connection. We have staff, not only social workers, we have family and community support providers in schools that get to know our families, understand what that family and student needs. They're able to make a connection or referral to a community-based agency, but there could be other barriers, right, as to why a family accesses those. So as you can hear me explain, it is not as simple as that student just doesn't, or that student or family, they just don't care. They don't want to come to school. No, it is so much more than that. It is also about engagement. Students sometimes tell me, I am not engaged. I don't feel connected to what I'm learning. I don't understand the purpose of why I'm learning what I'm learning. So another way that we've tried that is with our pathways. We have career pathways at our high school so that our students are able to see, ooh,
I'm learning this in school.
Yes.
This is going to get me here.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I can apply this to manufacturing. I can apply this to healthcare. I can apply this to public speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a number of different questions, and just listening to you is like making me go on a number of different tangents. But because you've talked about data, and how the district uses data to track student progress, you've talked about some targeted programs for students who are significantly behind grade level. Are there just any other strategies or other interventions that you'd be willing to share or discuss, or?
Yes, and I think the beauty, but the complexity, right? Education, public education, it is highly complex, and then you overlay the context that we're in, right? Which students have so many different needs. You have to look at solving for it, which I think is never ending, in public education. You have to look at solving for it from holistically, right? We have to look at what the student needs, but we also have to look at what we call the instructional core. So what that means is, first of all, research says that the number one change agent in making sure that students are growing in their learning is the teacher. The teacher. Wow. Having high access consistently to an experienced, exceptional teacher, that's the number one resource that we need to ensure we have in order for students to continue to excel. The next influence, change agent, is the school leader. Mm-hmm. Right? So making sure that we're supporting teachers. So when I talk about the instructional core, it is the curriculum. That is the what. What exactly, what are the resources, the curriculum and the content, if we're talking about math, for example, right? We have to make sure that those materials are high quality and that they support all learners. Then we have to make sure that the way in which a lesson, right, the instruction, it's called pedagogy, the way in which the teacher delivers the instruction, that we also support educators with that. And then is what I say the magic of it all, which is the interaction of the teacher, what the teacher is delivering or teaching, and the student. That interaction of those three, what happens in the classroom is what we, at the central office, for example, school leaders have to make sure they are supporting. Mm-hmm. In that, because we know that not all students can access for a variety of reasons, that's when we have interventions. So if the majority of the students are supposed to be able to access the curriculum, the instruction, some students need more support. Mm-hmm. That's where the next level, what we call tier 2 supports, come in. That might mean students that need additional time, additional support in smaller groups. And then there are students that need even more intense support. That becomes level 3 support. Those are smaller one-on-one supports, but all of that requires resources.
So I think I was going to transition then into a couple of different questions. You mentioned kind of the crucial role of the teacher in delivering instruction in the student's life. How is the district attracting and retaining high-quality teachers and staff?
That is probably the pain point of the moment, and I think we might be in this moment for pain point for a long time, because not only do I see it statewide, I also see it nationally, that we have a teacher shortage, and it requires us to do a few different things. In Hartford, some of the things that we're doing, well, first of all, I'm excited that we do have a new teacher contract for next year. And while it doesn't get us on par with all of our neighboring communities, it gets us up. And I think our teachers deserve that and much more. So we're working toward that. So that's one, because we have to make sure that teachers are feeling like one that they're compensated, but that they feel and that they see and that they hear that we value them and that they matter. That's that. The other thing is the support that we provide for teachers that are already here. We have coaching. We have professional development. We have teachers that serve as mentors to new teachers. Mm-hmm. All of that is part of, right, the growth and development of the new teacher that we have so that we can retain them, but also the teacher that has been here that has expertise, that have this wealth of knowledge that they can share with others. Then we are working on the recruitment. We have incentives to recruit, especially in those areas that we call shortage areas. For example, bilingual teachers, special education teachers, math and science teachers. We have sign-on bonuses for $5,000 sign-on bonuses, for example, for those areas. We also have our Grow Your Own programs. We have many paraeducators in the district, and so we know that some of them are interested in becoming teachers. So we give them scholarships, for example, mm-hmm. to pursue and become certified. We allow them to do some of that work in our classrooms. We also have partnerships with our higher education partners, so that students that are student teaching, they come to Hartford Public Schools, do their student teaching with us, get compensated, get a stipend for that, and then stay on with us and transition without a problem, right? Wow. They already know the system, they already know, our curriculum, they already know our policies, our procedures, our approaches. They're already part of the family. Mm-hmm. Those are some examples.
Great. Oh, wow. And then I guess that's also then kind of leading to talking about the budget and resource allocation. Beyond attracting talent, what are some other big financial challenges facing Hartford Public Schools?
Yes, that has been.
I feel like that could be a conversation.
Yes, and I think it was just yesterday. I was having a conversation with someone. I said, I remember coming in as I was actually an acting I wasn't even superintendent. I was acting superintendent, and I think back then it was a $26 million deficit that, like, in 4 months I had to figure out how to mitigate. And I'm thinking, well, as I transition out, it's another deficit that we have, and it has been the challenge overall. A variety of reasons for that. I just want to explain not the what we have challenging now, but the reason why, if you allow me a few minutes to do that.
Absolutely.
Is so we have rising costs to begin with, right? That's a thing, right? We're all paying more for everything. So that's real. The other thing is flat funding for a variety of reasons. We know that the City of Hartford in and of itself has had, challenges as well with finances and trying to stay, to at least become stronger in their financial foothold. And so that's been a challenge because we don't have, compared to other municipalities, the amount of tax base, right? Because the home ownership rate is lower in Hartford.
Right.
And we know that home ownership contributes, right, additional funds and revenue. And then there is the reality about the lower enrollment in students. I believe that of the 169 municipalities, I think there's probably a handful in the state of Connecticut that have enrollment that is increasing. The rest are decreasing in enrollment, right? We know that families are not having children the rate that they were before. And we also know that we have here what I call an ecosystem of school choice, right? So students go to others, either other towns, other magnets. Some, we welcome students from other towns. So all of those things, in addition to the cost of transportation and special education costs. We do have a school system of choice, and it is great that it serves many of our students really well. But there are some other unintended consequences I think still haven't been addressed around, for example, special education, because our students deserve to have all their needs met. And that comes at a cost that we in Hartford Public Schools are responsible for. And so without changes at the state level of the funding formula. And so we have to pay a little more. We don't get full reimbursement, for example, for special education costs. So we have to pull the rest that we don't get reimbursed for from our general budget, which would have gone, right, to other programming. And so all of those, things are tangled together, and we're in a budget again in which now that the federal funding for COVID relief is dried up, that funding has gone away, we now are back to the shortfalls that we were facing before COVID. So currently, in this budget that I'm recommending for next year, we started with a $30 million deficit. We've worked really hard with our schools at our central office. We've been able to reduce the majority of that, at least half of that. We heard that the mayor and the city are appropriating for next year $3 million. At the end of it, we're still missing $6.7 million at the moment. And so, our meeting last week with the board made a decision that they were going to ask me to present the budget with that gap to the city, with the hope, the expectation that there's additional funding that comes in. And also me making it very clear to the board that not knowing that the city is in that position to allocate additional funding, we still have to move forward with letting everyone know of what that potential impact is going to be. So we're in this, it's a challenging time, frustrating, and at times sad time, because we, I know that budgets are numbers on a spreadsheet. I know that. But behind those numbers are people. Behind those numbers are our staff, our caring staff, our programs and services that I and the team deeply believes our students need. On that list of unaccounted items that equate to $6.7 million are the student success centers that I shared with you before, our career pathways, partners that provide career and technical support for students. Those are things that are on that list that I believe we should not at all do without for a variety of reasons. One, because those are the things that the community, when we engaged early on during my tenure, said they wanted and they needed. And two, because we have seen that because of those resources, programs, and supports, we've seen the impact in student growth, in graduation rates, and students feeling like they're more connected to their learning.
So kind of to that point, and since this is a program of Hartford NEXT, I kind of wanted to ask then, how can we as a community support the district's financial needs and priorities?
That is such a great question. I am going to encourage everyone to advocate, advocate, and advocate. Connect with your local state representatives, and explain the challenges that we have. Look, I say this all the time, in Hartford Public Schools, we're not asking for shiny new objects. We're not. On that list is middle school sports. Middle school sports, which when I became superintendent, we did not have. Mm-hmm. There were less than a handful of schools that had middle school sports, which is, it's not even a given. It's just like a foundational structure and element and offering in many, many other communities, right? We are here to, yes, educate the student academically, but students are developing people. They are developing emotionally, they are developing psychologically, they're developing physically, and athletics and extracurricular sports are necessary for not only just physical development, but for feeling that you're part of a community, for problem solving, for communication, for self-esteem,
health-related
so
impacts,
many
correct.
things. And we know what the state of mental health nowadays. And so we are not asking for add-ons. We're asking for basic foundational things that I believe our students are worthy of. That and so much more. So these are the things that I ask our community to, one, understand, get informed about, and advocate for. Specifically, we are advocating for the funding formula to include an added weight for special education students, given that is, that's an expense for us. It's a big driver for us. And so if we're able to get additional funding for that, that also frees us other resources to do all these other things that are foundational. They're not extra shiny objects.
Can I ask you then to kind of maybe drill in a little bit more on that? A recent article indicated that 20% of students, I think not just in Hartford but across the country, are identified as requiring special education. So that seems high. Can you maybe give us a little bit more information? Like, what is the definition of special education? How do the categories break down?
Yes, so special education falls under the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act, and it is a federal requirement for schools to provide the individualized resources and supports that are determined by a planning and placement team at a school. Mm-hmm. And so there are 13 different reasons why needs that students might have that require special education services. They might have a learning disability. They might need speech and language support. They might need physical therapy, for example. And so creating a plan that supports that student, and that plan translates into, sometimes it is extra time and resources that students need to work with a speech therapist, to work with a math teacher. And there are times that students need, for example, a paraeducator to support the teacher or the student in the school. And so those translate into resources, and students are every year, at the very minimum, have a review of their plan where the parent, the guardian, the parent, the caregiver, sometimes the student, the teacher, a team, they come together to review the progress or not that a student is making. Oftentimes, it requires specific testing and evaluations to determine if there's progress, if there's something else that a student needs that, as the student develops and progresses, shows up differently. And so it is a requirement that has to happen. The connection to the resource piece is, for example, currently we have about a total of 150 vacancies teacher vacancies in Hartford Public Schools. About 50 of those are special education teachers. And so that means that those plans they're legal documents that have to be upheld. Without the teachers and the educators, we're not able to deliver those resources in a timely manner. Wow. So we then have to create what is called compensatory time. That means that when the resources are available, the student will get the resource. So do you begin to see when we talked about earlier that opportunity gap?
Right.
This is a perfect example. Right. There is a plan. There is a need. By the way, we have the funding in our budget for the positions. It's not that we don't have the money. I want to clarify that. It's just we don't have the people. We don't have the people. Here and in other spaces, right? Special education across the country is a shortage area. So are speech and language therapists, for example, school psychologists. All of those are part of the educational learning experience that students need, but specifically special education students, for example.
Wow. Thank you for clarifying.
Did I answer that? I
yes,
tried to hit
did.
as much as I could.
No, and I really appreciate that you're giving such a full scope, because then I have like so many different questions or different areas that I want to explore a bit more.
That's the educator in me.
You know, there you go. I mean, one thing that I'm kind of curious then about, obviously, I personally, I don't believe that AI, for example, is going to replace humans. Is there, and I'm not suggesting that that should be the case necessarily in schools, but is there a way that the district does incorporate technology and innovation into learning, maybe not to replace those resources specifically, but in other ways to support students?
Yes, and this is a topic I'm very, very passionate in myself. And I do believe that there are opportunities that we could leverage. First, though, technology, not only do we have pathways for our students, or we have our engineering and green technology pathway, we do have our one-to-one devices, which we were so fortunate that we were able to get with COVID funding. However, guess what? I don't have a strategy for in the budget to sustain that, I just want to say. And we have, for example, AI 101 that we have provided for our educators. We have a group of, I'm so excited about this. We, in partnership with our colleagues at Google, we have a group that was exposed to how to use some of the tools to support their learning as adults and their practice. So we have about 36, I think it was 36 or 39 tools that our educators, there were social workers, there were teachers, there were school leaders that they developed to help them be more effective and efficient in their way of working. Mm-hmm. Lesson planning, for example. We have a tool that was developed to help students that are getting ready for the SAT, that I hear a specific school, a high school, is working with students to create an app for. So these are different things that we're doing, but I think that the piece here is having the opportunity to create time. Time is a resource, right? To create time for educators to think about, ooh, what's something that if I had a tool to support and free me from, I could develop time, space to help students, right, with their own needs. And then on the student side, look, I do believe that there are some technologies that are going to be able to, in the very near future, help some of our students. For example, our multilingual learners. There are tools that students can leverage at home to practice. There are, already we know we have translation tools that are so many of our students and families use. You're not asking me this question, but I will say that education, and I'm talking now about public education. Education has to, and I think it will. There's no choice but to change and evolve. Let's use the word evolve instead of change. We know that the system has been designed to, in a way, to still operate as if we were still in like the agricultural era. We are so far removed from that. Right. And so to think that all students, and we were all students, everyone here, everyone watching, at some point or another, we were students. and it's still designed from a specific time in the morning to a specific time in the afternoon by block scheduling, all students, having to kind of access in the same way. That is, first of all, that is not the human condition. And we have a ton of research. We've had it. It's not new research. We've had a ton of research around the science of learning that says that students learn differently in different ways, that students learn in different paces at different timelines, that they can access learning differently, and that they need to, at all levels, understand the meaning behind their learning. And if they can do that in a way that they can connect it to their world, magic happens. So it's hard to do that. Absolutely. Because we continue to do it the same way. And the last thing I'll say is that our educators, we often solve for the student, absolutely. But we also think about, remember earlier I said, that the change agent, the number one change agent that we have to make sure we're supporting is the educator, so that they could be at their best at all times. So we also have to solve for what is the condition that has to change the experience for the educator. Not all of them need to learn the same thing in their professional learning experience, right? How could we also personalize the experience for our educators? Absolutely. So that's what I mean by we've got to change it, and I'm actually excited about that opportunity.
I've got a few more questions, and eventually, a few more questions before we take audience questions. And I think I will want to get to some other maybe predictions that you have for the future. Ooh. But thinking about, obviously supporting the educator, but also thinking about kind of the wraparound support for students, how does the district engage with parents in supporting their child's academic growth at home? Talking about freeing up time for educators to teach. Curious about your thoughts on that.
Yes, and I always think that we can always do so much more. That's also, I talked about, that's the educator in me, that's the learner in me. I'm always thinking, how can we get better today than we were yesterday? And how can we get better tomorrow than we were today? So in that space around partnerships with our families and caregivers and community, we have, for example, family and community support providers in schools. We have 39 schools, 2 specific programs. So that's a lot of opportunities for people to do things differently. First, I want to call that out. But the essence of having a family and community support provider in each of our schools is to be able to have, to be the liaison, right? That point person that can have time to connect and engage with the family, understand the family needs, especially when students are having difficulties. We talked earlier around chronic absenteeism. That is a key person. It is also an opportunity for that person to work with the school, the educators, the administration on what are the things that they're hearing that families need. Perhaps there's a specific literacy program that has to be, created so that families understand what exactly are my children learning in the first grade. What do we mean by the science of learning? What do we mean by phonics? What do we mean by let's help students sound the words? Those are the resources in the schools. We also have our partners, community-based organizations that know sometimes our families in a very different and intimate way that we don't know, but they're there to help make those connections. And I think the last thing that I would say is we at the central office also try to communicate with families in different ways. We, have tools that families can access, our Parent Square, where we try to communicate either new resources, new opportunities, encouraging people to get involved in our budget, for example, a lot of different ways that we're trying to go at it. And I know that families are so busy. There's a lot. Right. There's a lot going on in the world, in our communities, right? And so to the extent possible, we're always thinking about how do we make it easier, more accessible for our families and our caregivers.
That's great. That's great. And in addition to, obviously working with parents, with working with communities, with working with budgets, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities you see in the district in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years. So, and this actually is informed, we just finished a strategic planning process, and so it's going to be ready for the new leader, right? The next innovative leader that comes in to make that come to life. But some of the things that are next, because of not only what the needs are, because what we heard from community, for example, is making sure that students have access to high quality teachers at all times. So that means that we have to focus on how do we recruit, how do we support, and how do we retain. That is not going to change. Also, opportunities for students to explore careers, what the industry needs are, right? We talked about technology and AI. There's manufacturing. There's so much around that.
Right.
And so how do we continue earlier on, not just at the high school level? I believe this is a recommendation that I'm leaving behind, by the way, is expose our students earlier on to the various industries and various, opportunities in work, so that they can begin to think about, right, what they might like earlier on. The other piece that I will say is there is a need to get better at the personalization of learning. You talked about special education students before. We have 26% of our students are considered multilingual learners. We have over 80 languages in Hartford Public Schools.
That's great.
And so that's outstanding.
Yeah.
And some of our students come with, some do not have any exposure to schooling. This is the variety of needs that we have, right? Some students have had interruptions for several years in their schooling for a variety of reasons. Other students have added levels of needs. And so personalizing the instruction and the support for students is a must moving forward, and leveraging technology potentially. You're not hearing me say replacing the educator, but leveraging technology to help with that personalization as well. And then a pain point that we have is the funding, the resources. That's still true, because personalization of learning, it does cost more. It just requires either more people, more time, or more money. We cannot get away from that. That is just what it is.
Right.
So that's a barrier that must be solved for. That could continue to require how you address the budget that we have, although we've tried really hard over the last 8 years, and a total mitigation over by the time I transitioned, I think it's $150 million that I've had to mitigate.
Wow.
Just pause on that number. Over 9 years. Over 500 staff members at the school and central office sites.
Right.
So that still has to get solved for, but because it is a structural issue, that requires added intervention and support at the city and at the state level. Those are some of the things that from now until 5 years. But I can't end on that sour point, because there's so much hope.
One opportunity. And instead of a challenge, what's an opportunity in the next 5 years?
I think on the other side of all of those things that I just said is the opportunity.
Right.
When you personalize learning, students will find and feel and see that they are capable, that they are adults, that there are systems, that there are structures and resources to support their dreams, and that they can actualize on their dreams. When you work in partnership with community, we all understand that we're in it together, not one person. It doesn't matter. You can get Superwoman, Superman, whoever to come in as a superintendent. We just talked about how it's not about one person. It is not only about the leader, but we know that the most important change agents, the research has confirmed this over and over again. I'm going to test you. What did I say? Were the change agents? The teacher. Followed by the school leader, right? And then all the other conditions. So in the next 5 years, the opportunity is to continue to pour into our educators, so that they continue to be outstanding and continue to elevate, right, their practice, and also on the leader, because they're the little agents of their school communities.
Right. So on that note, then, what's next for Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez?
Oh, great question. Let's see. I will tell you that my mission and my purpose, those are so anchored that will never change, right? It is making sure that our young people, who I deeply believe are just so beautiful, each and every one of them, and they're so deeply capable, that I will continue to create those conditions that I spoke about, so that opportunity gap continues, right, to close, and so that communities could be at their best. I deeply believe that it is our young people that are going to solve for the problems, not only that we're facing in our schools, but in our broader community and the world. And so I have a passion for building capacity in other people. We've had 4 of the people that have been in my senior leadership team have gone on to become superintendents. And
Wow.
I've been very intentional. The minute they say to me, I aspire to be a superintendent, I say, well, you got to give me at least 4 years. We need stability in the district. And then during that time, I'm going to pour everything that I know, good and the pain points. So they've gone on to be superintendents. I have a passion for leadership capacity building at multiple levels. And so I will be devoting time for that.
That's great.
And I also believe that schools and places of learning should and must be designed and co-created with community, especially with our families and our students and our educators. And so I'll be devoting time to that as well.
That's great. Well, we look forward to seeing your next steps.
Yeah.
On that note, I think we'll transition to audience questions, whether from folks here in the audience or joining us online. And please, before you start your question, introduce yourself.
I'm Susan Lennon. I live here in the West End. Whoops. And I have 3 questions for you. I'll let you sort them out. But first, I just want to tell you how grateful I am for everything you have done. My husband and I do not have children, so I don't really have firsthand experience in the school systems. It's what I read and what I observe. And for me, education is probably the most important social institution. So I will just leave it at, I am extremely grateful for all you have done. So my 3 questions are, the Student Success Centers are a new concept for me, and I would love to hear you talk more about them and who those students are. What's the profile of them, and how do you measure success? The second is to the point of resources. I have the great joy of reading at the Parkville School every Monday through Read to a Child, and it is truly a joy. And I think about this in conjunction with that program, but also just in terms when you talk about community resources. How do we engage more people, especially people like me who are retired and have time? How do we engage more people in broadening the resources that you need? And the third is, you mentioned children have so many choices now in schools, and I see that what you have done is really tried to make the Hartford schools be a destination. And how do we continue to work to do that? Because I just hear so many of our class seats are empty. How do we bridge this city-suburb conflict?
Wow, outstanding questions, Ms. Lennon. First, thank you for taking, Susan, for being here. And I receive your gratitude and reflect it back to our community. I heard you say you don't have children. Your questions point to your commitment and investment. So I just also want to thank you for that. So our Student Support and Success Centers was actually something, a concept I started when I was the director of the Freshman Center in Manchester High School years ago, when I noticed that some students were disengaged and not progressing, and were at risk of not graduating on time. And so I thought, okay, the research says that we have to intervene in 9th grade. If they fall off their progression in 9th grade, they're highly likely to not graduate on time. So that's where the essence became. And so the profile of the student is students that are not, oftentimes they're already disengaged, right? They've had a pattern of chronic absenteeism before they get to the high school. Oftentimes they have not kept up pace with being on track to graduation, and that means they have not accumulated the number of credits necessary. And so these are students that without that intervention would take 5, perhaps 6 years to graduate high school. And when they're off track, they're not likely to want to stay around, because that means that they've not had a positive experience. So the Success Center it's actually a center, at our comprehensive high schools, Hartford High, Buckley, and Weaver, they have additional resource teachers, they have tutors, students use technology to get back to their coursework through a platform, but also with their tutoring and the resource teacher supporting them. So there's a lot of support. We get them back on track, and we've had hundreds of students that have been able to graduate on time if it weren't for the success centers. So that's an example of the profile. The one thing that the surprise there for us has been the way that the families have responded to this intervention. We thought these are the students that have already been disengaged, which most likely mean their families have lost connection to the schools. They don't want to deal with the school. The way the families have responded, families have felt that they're now being heard, listened, and understood. So we're now tackling, yes, the student, but again, to my point earlier, that ecosystem. Your question about reading to a child and how the community can support, this is an area of opportunity. How can we leverage volunteers? How can we get more volunteers into our schools? That is an opportunity for the future, and one recommendation that I'm going to make to the new administration. And for that, we need resources. And let me explain. Resources are our community, right? Our assets. You are there. You have the passion. But there's also all the back office stuff, right? We have to get the background checks done. We have to have someone to organize the logistics of welcoming you when you get to the school, while we are saying, ooh, we don't have enough resources for some of the supports. So yes, we want to continue to open the doors, and we have to find a way internally to make that happen so that it's faster for you. The minute you say, I want to read to a child at Parkville, not just on one day, I want to read 3 days a week. So how do we make that happen? So that's on us as well. And the third, the issue of choice. That is a prickly one. And let me say that, yes, we have tried to make our choices appealing. But this is, earlier I talked about, we will have, at the end of my tenure, there will be 8 new facilities, beautiful, innovative facilities. And there are also other challenges that are at play. We know that as part of the choice, the Chef versus O'Neill, the latest agreement, there are certain criteria, because the criteria still exists for students to, a certain amount of students from a socioeconomic, level, for example, a certain amount from places outside of Hartford. And so while we have empty seats, we know that sometimes we are not attracting the right number of students for each of those criteria. So as much as we want to change that, it's more complex than that, right? Hartford Public Schools is not a party, although we get sometimes to inform how those agreements should be. It is more complex than that. I am hopeful, though. I do remain hopeful. I think by now, the challenge around resource, yes, is a Hartford. It is a disproportionate issue for Hartford Public Schools. But I think by now, this issue of resource is also impacting others that operate within the ecosystem of school choice. We all serve special education students. We are now serving multilingual learners. So it's, yes, making our offerings more attractive, Susan, but it's also tending to the resource challenge that has to be solved for at the state level.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We have another question here.
Hi, Miss. Good morning. I am one of your old parents, which you remember quite well. I have served for 9 years at Mary Hooker voluntarily and 2 years at Parkville, PTOs. And I have 2 talented students in the school system which graduated from here. Right? They are at college. I dropped one at college this morning to do his stat, and I am here to go back and pick him up at 11:45. That's why I'm sorry I took the mic earlier than I came. However, let me say thank you for doing all you have done for the years. However, as a strategic person, and I'm an international around the world, I have traveled and taught, right? and things. So I was able to change some of the things in Hartford Public Schools, like the Renzulli Academy was done by me for my first son at age 4. They had nothing to offer him, and things. So apart from that, I am looking at ways of which you could implement some things. One of the first thing I'm going to ask, the roles and function of our talent management part of the office. Have they ever been evaluated? And I am looking to request a demolition of that so that you could save some money in the system. Another one is, we have students in high school which give advanced placement, like going to the college and take up courses. However, from my experience, is that though the courses are being offered, the children, when they go to UConn, it's not accepted. I am giving my son experience. He is a talented and gifted student, and he did courses at UHart and did courses at Science School, University of Hartford Science and Engineering. However, the ones courses that he took from Hartford University is not accepted at UConn. So it's a waste of time and waste of our dollars to educate those children when they take those courses.
These are, sorry.
Another one is that the children, when they take those courses in high school, advanced placement college courses, the curriculum that they take in high school is not the curriculum that they have in the colleges. So there's a repetition of taking the course. I am requesting that those very curriculum that is offered in the college is being offered to the children in high school, so they get the full credit. Another one is that I have always been looking. The system only addressed our children with learning disabilities. They never addressed the children that are talented as also children with special needs. And so if we have an evaluation of the amount of students we have that are talented and offer them advanced placement in the school, even if per subject, right? It will eliminate some cost and get them out of the system faster. My son, one of them, the bigger one that is at UConn, he suffered everything in high school. He has everything 100, 105, 106, but he was not given an opportunity to go in the next grade. So it was later he said, Mom, that when I took my SAT test, I should have asked not to take the pre-SAT. I should have taken the SAT and go to the principal and ask to come out of high school. At 8th grade, they had already taken him out, but with advice, I still put him in high school, and which he regretted. Yeah, so situations like these are among our parents, are among our students in the community. I help. And you know what, with my educational background, I do that. And so I was a self-taught parent. I teach my children at home. And I also help the teachers at school how to evaluate a child coming into the system without a record, educational record. And one typical teacher was Dr. Herman at Mary Hooker. You know, so that's what I'm looking forward for. And if we could break down, when you ask about the growth, the success of our school, right, how we measured success, right? I'm taking up some time, but I can give that later, how to measure success. And so if we measure every child in our special needs and show their growth, and with using that chart, using that graph, and we go to our legislation, definitely they will see progress and they will give you more dollars. It got to be individual growth per grade. I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm taking notes on because I want to be able to respond. And I think some of these comments connect to some of the questions that we've discussed around talent management. And while we can't demolish the Office of Talent Management because those are the ones that help us process the people that apply to the school system, we are now actually responding to some recommendations made by an inquiry that was done by a technical assistance provider hired by the state. Last year, given our budget challenge, the state said, "Oh, Hartford, you have a lot going on with your budget. There's no way you can be missing, you can have such a budget gap." I said, okay. And so they did an inquiry. Okay, great, they did an inquiry. Well, they didn't find millions and millions of dollars hanging around, which we knew they weren't going to find. However, there were some, I'm not trying to, you're the one laughing, not me. But I sense your yes, the frustration is mutual. However, despite, and we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, multiple people on my team providing the information needed, and while they didn't find millions of dollars hanging around, what they did make were some recommendations for streamlining some of the positions at the central office, including in such of those departments, and feeling like, well, there might be an extra level at the central office team that you might be able to consolidate, merge, and so there are savings there that we're gonna be able to see. The reference to AP courses not being accepted, this is an ongoing actually conversation that we're having with higher education providers. Right, we can't tell UConn or Trinity, for example, whoever, what to accept. The plus here, the positive is the experience that our students have when they have the access. Earlier, we talked about opportunity gap. Mm-hmm. This is a perfect example, right? Some students having just the access of the content in the curriculum, which, by the way, AP courses are approved by the College Board. That's nothing that our teachers have to go and get trained to do that. We don't make that up, we don't do that correct. That is specific, very prescribed. And so we will continue to work with our higher ed partners so that they can, but all we can do is inform and encourage. What's important for us, yes, we want our students to transfer the credit when they go to college, but what is important for us is for students to have the exposure and the opportunity to the content and the level of rigor of a course that is supposed to be equivalent to what their experience in college is going to be. Some students don't get get a passing score. Okay, we want them to get a passing score. However, they walk away with the experience and the rigor. That also matters to us. In terms of measure of success, you talked about growth. That is another connection to the opportunity gap, because oftentimes we hear proficiency. Students are reading on grade level. Yes, we want all of our students to read at grade level. Absolutely. We also know that I talked earlier, 26% of our students are multilingual learners. They have English. They're learning English as their second language. The tests are administered. Guess in what language?
English.
Right. So right. These are all of the things that we have to keep in mind. And so growth is important, because while we can pool all the students and say, oh yeah, that's right. They're not all 100 at proficiency. But are they meeting their growth targets for the year? That is an opportunity measure versus achievement gap measure, which is, okay, all the students thinking that they're all learning at the same time, in the same way, getting all of their resources. Right. So it is, I agree with you around a growth measure. So
we have a quick question online. Of the total city budget for the City of Hartford, approximately what percentage is for Hartford Public Schools?
I'm going to have to owe you that. I don't know what percentage of their budget is ours. What I will say is that for next year, I said this a little earlier, that we did get word that we are getting an additional $3 million for next year from the city. They also actually pay for our crossing guards, which is about $1 million. So there's, there are other ways in which they're supporting. I want to also highlight that. The challenge that we have is we not only did we approve a that the board approved a teacher's contract, right? Our paraeducators, our secretaries, we have 12 bargaining units. And we want to make sure that we're doing right by all of our staff members. And so the gap is there, and we're hopeful that our partners at the city are able to see. I'm looking forward to presenting our budget so that they understand all the nuances. And I'm also hopeful that perhaps there are other funding streams that we can look into. Right, our community schools. We didn't talk about community schools today, but community schools are it's something that I wanted to expand, and we've been able to expand during my tenure from 7 community schools to 13 community schools with wraparound supports. However, they're on that list that I talked about of 6.7 gap. So I'm hopeful that also, in partnership with the city, we're able to identify other funding streams. But it is, yes, city. But it's also, the revenue, the money that comes in, also comes from state allocations as well.
And this one's from me personally, Frank Sentner, SOTO NRZ, and also program co-chair for the program committee for Hartford NEXT. I'm aware of, in the category of technology, a technology that was developed actually by a Connecticut educator. That's called Behavior RTI. And I believe there was a pilot program with 4 schools which helped to do the paperwork necessary for, referring students for the counselors, school counselors. And you were talking about getting time back as a resource. The amount of time that teachers have to take to actually fill out the paperwork to refer a student to get a school psychologist to speak with them is, pretty onerous. And this school psychologist created the software himself. Philip Medeiros, yeah. It's called Behavior RTI.
I will be certainly looking into that. Intervention is part of, the system that we have to make sure that we're staying true to. It's the way that we are able to use the data. We talked about the data, not just absenteeism data, but behavior data, for example. Sometimes students, right? Sometimes when, for a variety of reasons, behavior shows up in schools, and so we want to monitor that and support that. But having tools to take things off the plate, if you will, from our educators is always welcome. So thank you for sharing that.
And now we'll hear from our co-chair, Hartford NEXT, Marion Griffin.
Thank you, Frank. This has been fabulous. I have to confess, I'm a former educator. I taught for 12 years, but I moved on to educate in the boardroom because there's always teachable moments. But I found this to be very informative. I hope you did as well. I learned a lot of things about the educational system in Hartford, even after, like Susan, reading a lot, keeping engaged. And by the way, I'm a grandmother. My grandson went through Noah Webster School from pre-K through 8th, and then went on to this School of Science and Engineering and graduated. I felt that Noah Webster was so welcoming. They called it micro-society. It is really helpful for the children to be able to work together and in a community within the school. So I'm very grateful that he was able to have that experience here. But what I'd like to do too is thank you both Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez for being here and sharing this with us, for our host, Matt Larson, and also for Principal Jacobson. This is a lovely space, and if anybody has the opportunity to volunteer and support the students at this school and any of the schools in Hartford, please go ahead and do so. So I am board co-chair for Hartford NEXT, as Frank said. I want to thank Yasna, our executive director, for introducing us to this program. And I'd also like to thank our funders, the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, as well as LIST, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. I'd also like to thank our program committee, Frank and Jack, for helping us to pull this together, and most importantly, to our dear Stan. I always call him Stan, the man who does our, whose Light Source Productions has helped us to do this. But I can't help but not give a plug to the NRZs. Hartford NEXT is a coalition of NRZs, and we are in the West End, or WECA, neighborhood, and they are one of the NRZs. But really, the neighborhood associations are the way that you, as a resident, can engage with and improve the quality of life in your neighborhood. Look at your schools, look at the organizations, raise your hands and do some things in your neighborhood. And as you heard, if you were here at the beginning, we have one more in this 12-part series of introducing everyone to the city services. It's our city. So the last one, please come and join us. This is going to be the celebration. It's get on board. We will have food. It's to introduce you to all of our boards and commissions, give you an opportunity if you've been just itching and aching to get involved with commission, use your expertise, or there was something you were interested in learning about, come and find and visit with us and join. It will be a panel discussion, as well as there will be tabling by each of the commissions and boards so that you can get to know people who are working on those commissions, as well as understand what you can do to join the commission, as well as I believe we will be having a training session afterwards. So if you are interested and you want to know more, you can all do it one and done. We're at the Hartford Public Library in the Center for Cultural, I'm not saying this for community culture. It's a fabulous space, and come and see the library. It is now reopened and continuing to reopen, but use the resources that we have in the city and come and be part of what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and we have a question.
What is the date and time of the meeting?
Well, thank you so much. It is Saturday, May 3rd, and we'll start, you come at 10 o'clock. So please join us. There is registration information. Look on the Hartford NEXT website. There shall be information up on that website soon so that you can register. And do come and join us. But thank you again, Dr. Torres. Thank you again, Matt. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you.